Welcome to Global Watch. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a historic decision, the United States Supreme Court has struck down the sweeping tariffs enacted by former President Donald Trump, reshaping the boundaries of presidential authority and global trade. This landmark ruling not only challenges the executive branch's reach, but also redefines the balance of power between the government and the market. For years, these tariffs sparked fierce debate, raising prices on everyday goods and disrupting supply chains across industries. Consumers felt the pinch at the checkout lines, while businesses grappled with increased costs and logistical nightmares. The court's ruling closes a contentious chapter in American economic policy, built on a controversial use of emergency powers. This decision underscores the judiciary's role in checking executive overreach and preserving the constitutional balance. This is a global event, sending a clear signal to world leaders and multinational corporations. The U.S. is returning to a more predictable, rules-based trading system. The international community is now watching closely to see how this shift will influence global trade dynamics. The decision raises urgent questions about how nations wield economic tools for national security and strategic advantage. It prompts a re-evaluation of how economic policies are crafted and implemented in an increasingly interconnected world. Whether you're a business owner, a factory worker, or a family at the supermarket, this ruling will impact your wallet and the broader economy. The ripple effects will be felt in every corner of the nation, influencing prices, jobs, and economic stability. Today marks a turning point in the story of American power, money, and the principles of governance. The Supreme Court's decision is a reminder of the enduring importance of checks and balances in our democracy. To truly grasp the significance of today's Supreme Court ruling, we need to look back and understand how we arrived at this pivotal moment in American history. The roots of this decision stretch back decades, woven into the fabric of U.S. trade policy and presidential power. To see why this case matters, we must revisit its origins and the bold choices that set it in motion. The Trump administration's tariffs were not just another policy, they became the centerpiece of its America First agenda. But rather than relying on traditional trade laws, the administration invoked the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a law originally intended for very different circumstances. IEEPA was crafted to give presidents the ability to impose sanctions on hostile nations during times of genuine crisis, such as war or national security threats, not to levy sweeping tariffs on everyday trade partners. Yet the administration declared trade deficits and illicit drug flows as national emergencies, using this justification to bypass Congress and impose tariffs on goods from nearly every major trading partner around the globe. This aggressive and unprecedented move marked a sharp break from decades of U.S. free trade policy, signaling a new era of economic confrontation and uncertainty. The tariffs targeted hundreds of billions of dollars in imports, from raw materials like steel and aluminum to finished goods such as electronics and machinery, affecting countless industries and supply chains. The stated goal was to protect American manufacturers and jobs, hoping to revive domestic industries and reduce reliance on foreign goods. But critics quickly argued that this was a dangerous overreach of executive power, transforming an emergency law into a tool for economic protectionism and setting a precedent that could be abused by future presidents. The U.S. Constitution is clear: the power to levy taxes and regulate trade belongs to Congress, not the president. This fundamental principle of separation of powers was now under threat. This fundamental dispute over the boundaries of executive authority set the stage for a high-stakes legal battle, one that would ultimately reach the nation's highest court. At stake was not just the fate of a single policy, but the very limits of presidential authority in times of crisis and the future balance of power in American government. The outcome would shape the future of American trade, influence global markets, and determine how far a president can go in the name of national emergency. The legal and economic fallout would be enormous, with consequences rippling through industries, jobs, and the very foundation of American democracy. Legal challenges erupted almost immediately, led by American businesses claiming the president had exceeded his constitutional authority. They argued the tariffs were a massive tax hike without congressional consent, violating the separation of powers. The government countered that IEEPA's broad language allowed the president to act in response to national security threats. The case, consolidating several lawsuits, became a flashpoint for the debate over executive power. Lower courts began to side with the plaintiffs, ruling that IEEPA did not authorize such tariffs. The Supreme Court was left to decide: Can the president unilaterally impose taxes under the guise of national security? The Supreme Court's hearing was tense, with justices scrutinizing the administration's use of IEPA. Lawyers for businesses argued the law was never meant for broad tariffs, and that established trade statutes require more oversight. Justice Sotomayor noted, "Tariffs are taxes," highlighting the constitutional stakes. Justices questioned whether any economic issue could be declared a national emergency, raising concerns about unchecked executive power. Even those sympathetic to the government worried about the chaos of unwinding the tariffs and refunding billions. The government's national security argument faced skepticism. The Treasury had collected over $100 billion from these tariffs, with potential refund liabilities in the trillions. The justices faced not just a legal question, but a decision with massive financial consequences. The nation waited for a ruling that would reshape the balance of power. The Supreme Court delivered a decisive 6-3 verdict, ruling that the Trump administration had overstepped its authority by using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, to impose tariffs. This landmark decision has far-reaching implications for the balance of power between the executive branch and Congress. Chief Justice Roberts wrote in the majority opinion that while EPA grants significant powers to the president, it does not authorize the imposition of broad-based tariffs. He emphasized that taxation is a power reserved for Congress, reinforcing the principle of separation of powers. The tariffs, which had been a cornerstone of the Trump administration's trade policy, were declared unconstitutional from the start. This ruling invalidates the tariffs and sets a precedent for future executive actions. The immediate result of this ruling is that the Treasury Department must refund over $100 billion to importers who had paid these tariffs. This massive financial obligation is expected to trigger a wave of litigation and create significant budgetary challenges for the government. Consumers who had to pay higher prices for goods due to these tariffs will not see direct compensation. This underscores the broader economic impact and highlights who really bore the cost of these policies. The ruling sent shockwaves through Washington and the business world. Government officials are now scrambling to assess the fiscal fallout, while businesses are evaluating the potential benefits and challenges that lie ahead. Lawsuits are flooding the Court of International Trade as companies seek refunds for the tariffs they had paid. This legal battle is expected to be lengthy and complex, involving numerous stakeholders. For businesses, this ruling represents a long-awaited victory and a chance to recover significant financial losses. For government planners, however, it poses a fiscal crisis that will require careful management and strategic planning. Politically, the decision has reignited debate over the extent of executive power and the economic legacy of the previous administration. Lawmakers are now re-examining the limits of presidential authority in trade matters. The national conversation on trade and presidential authority has entered a new era, with this ruling serving as a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the balance of power in the U.S. government. The Supreme Court's decision ends a policy that deeply impacted the U.S. economy. Economists agree, the tariffs acted as a tax on American consumers and businesses, with most costs passed down the supply chain. Higher prices hit everything from appliances to shoes, squeezing household budgets. About half of U.S. imports are intermediate goods, so manufacturers faced soaring costs, making them less competitive. Ironically, the tariffs often hurt the very industries they aim to protect. The administration cited the trade deficit as justification, but experts argue this was a misdiagnosis. Trade deficits are normal for a wealthy, service-based economy. The tariffs contributed to a noticeable rise in inflation, with the Consumer Price Index up 3% year over year. Public opposition was strong, with most Americans blaming tariffs for higher living costs. While importers will get refunds, the broader economic pain has already been felt. The ruling closes a costly chapter, but its effects will linger. Legal scholars call today's decision a landmark for the separation of powers. Experts note IEPA lacks any language authorizing tariffs, and the court's majority embraced this view. The ruling reaffirms Congress's authority over trade and taxation. Economists say removing the tariffs will ease inflation and restore predictability to global supply chains. Some warn future presidents may turn to other trade laws, but these come with more checks and transparency. The decision is a clear check on executive overreach, reinforcing the need for collaboration between Congress and the White House. The Supreme Court's ruling redraws the boundaries of presidential power in the 21st century. By rejecting the broad use of IEEPA, the court has set clear limits on unilateral executive action and economic policy. Future presidents will have to rely on more transparent, accountable trade laws. The requirement to refund over $100 billion creates a fiscal crisis that demands cooperation between Congress and the White House. The decision strengthens Congress's power of the purse and may embolden lawmakers to assert more oversight. The judiciary has reaffirmed that the president is not above the law. Monumental economic decisions must flow through Congress, the representative body of the people. This case will be studied as a defining moment in the ongoing debate over presidential power. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn the Trump-era tariffs is a watershed moment for American governance and trade. The immediate challenge refunding over $100 billion to importers, a process that will dominate headlines and test government logistics. Consumers, however, are unlikely to see direct relief, highlighting the real cost of tariffs. The economic landscape is shifting as businesses adjust to a post-tariff reality. The big question: will future administrations seek new ways to impose tariffs? Or will this ruling foster greater cooperation between Congress and the White House? The world is watching as the U.S. recalibrates its trade relationships and redefines the limits of presidential power. The story isn't over. This is just the beginning of a new chapter in American trade policy.